If you don't mind introducing yourselves, but what I want to share with you about this, pretty amazing about this panel is the last panel had, academic, Sea Grant, other talents integrated into that. This one's got tremendous amount of industry experience woven into it. So if you don't mind, introduce yourselves. I'm going to hand you the mic and you guys can pass it along. And then we're going to dive right into some questions, but we're not going to use the Menti tool.
Okay. Thank you, Ken. My name's Nick King. I work for a company called Nordic Aquafarms. We're a Norwegian-owned company, and we are building a farm in Northern California for Seriola lowlandi yellowtail kingfish. It's a land-based farm, and I've been working probably the last 3 years in permitting that farm. So we're pretty close to the end. Certainly have a lot of experience around regulatory and supporting the permitting process. So with that, I'll give it over to Matt.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Matt Craze. I started Spheric Research a few years ago. We look at aquaculture, and especially we have a report which is called the Land-Based Aquaculture Report. It's kind of a global database of RAS projects, both in grow-out and also smolt facilities in the salmon industry. So we look at this globally. We do consulting here and there, and with different parts of the world.
I'm Nicole Kirchhoff. I have a farm called Live Advantage Bait in Florida. We've been around for like 10 years now. A long time ago as an academic, I have a PhD, fish health. We grow marine bait fish species and marine food fish species in a hatchery. There's not a lot of marine food fish demand, so we mostly grow bait fish, but we grow food fish when people ask for it. And also developing, for the last 7 years, a spawning implant that should be indexed within the next year. We're halfway through the process, so it's getting there slowly.
Hi, I'm Megan Sorby. I am working for New Development Pine Island Redfish. We are a land-based research farm in development in Southwest Florida, where we will grow red drum and reuse our effluent to grow red mangrove for remediation projects. Prior to this, I was working as part of the Kingfish Company, much like Nick, in a very long permitting process of a land-based facility. And prior to that, with a few other species that are up on this list today that we're still really passionate about pursuing and making sure that they make a splash on the commercial stage, if you pardon the pun, because we haven't had any today, so I thought we'd add one in there.
Hi, everybody. I think I am the one academic on the panel, actually. So I'm Jonathan Van Senten. I'm with Virginia Tech, the Virginia Seafood ARAC. My area is economics and marketing. So I have an appointment in the Department of Ag and Applied Economics.
Jonathan, do you mind sharing some of the work and the publications that you've been working on?
Sure.
Leading us off, because maybe we'll lead off on marketing and then dive into some.
Okay, sure. Yeah, so my program has looked at, together with funding from ARS and USDA, NOAA Sea Grant, we've looked at some of the existing supply chains for marine finfish. We started with a list of 20, but the 10 and 18 that were discussed earlier were part of that list. So we have a report that's out, that very comprehensive assessment of kind of where the supply of those fish that's coming to the U.S. market is right now. And then we've also done some consumer preference work in the Gulf Southeast region, looking at those species. We've also interviewed distributors to kind of figure out where they're at and where their thinking's at. That's a hard group to get in touch with and to get answers from sometimes. And we're continuing actually right now with developing enterprise budgets for production grow out and looking at some of the economics of hatchery production for those species.
That's awesome. And you've had a long partnership with Dr. Kira Lingle?
Yeah, that's right.
And then what would you say, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you one more question. What is the most significant finding that you could share with us? Like, what do you think is the, I know you're like, go read my papers. But, and I've read all your papers, and they get us excited about the opportunities is there.
I think the big thing for me is there is opportunity, right? I mean, I think everything we see is pointing out that there is this opportunity. You know, some of the discussion earlier, I think, is spot on, that some of these fish have really strong regional appeal. Part of that is maybe they're not well known in other regions, and there needs to be a concerted effort to maybe introduce them. You know, I mean, tilapia at one point, nobody in the U.S. ate tilapia. Now you find tilapia everywhere, right? Everybody knows what tilapia is now. That didn't happen by accident. That was a concerted marketing effort to introduce that fish. So, but I think that, you know, I think there's opportunity for all the fish on that list. But I think that discussion earlier was really spot on with kind of some fish are further along where that opportunity is ripe, and some still need some help getting there. The one thing I will say is, and I really appreciate Mike's comment, you know, one of the challenges I think that everyone has to be mindful of is there are still some very significant economic bottlenecks, right? And a lot of that goes back to the hatchery. And I did see someone made the comment earlier on the Menti where they said, you know, if every farm has to have its own hatchery, this is going to be really expensive. And I think that's one thing that we've seen in the numbers that we've put together too, is that, yeah, having a hatchery is really, really expensive. And so, you know, yeah, if every farm has to have its own hatchery, great. That's great for like genetic diversity, and it's great for having sources of seed, but the cost of doing that is also really high, which then pushes kind of that challenge of you now have to sell that fish for $30 a pound, otherwise you're not making a profit, you know. So there are some economic bottlenecks still, but I think the big takeaway for me is there's opportunity, for sure.
That sounds great. Thank you. Any questions from the audience? All right, George. George Marty's there. Oh. Matt, I'm going to go to you next, so just give you a...
Just to underline what Jonathan just said, I mean, I work with a number of clients that are looking and thinking of developing a project, and they're all excited. They get, you know, they understand the farm, and then they ask me, okay, George, where do I get the fingerlings? And I said, oh, you may have to build a hatchery. And then when you talk about the 2 years, the different skill set, the more money, okay, I'll go back to the other industry I was thinking about investing. So it's right on.
All right, so I'm going to go to Matt Craze next with Spirit. I met Matt for the first time. He gave a keynote at that salmon recirculating aquaculture workshop that we had in Maryland a few months ago. And he does produce this book that captures all of the land-based recirculating aquaculture operations. I want to ask you, how do you go about gathering data to understand like industry intelligence of where things are happening? And then the second part of that question, and I'll make sure to capture it, is how would we do something like that for offshore?
Yeah, I've already been looking at that. It's easier because there's not as many initiatives. It's to be honest, it's just a lot of hard work, a lot of bottom-up research. You know, it just took a long time. I think doing the first report I started looking at it in the Aquanor show in 2017, and I don't think we actually published the first one until 2020. So we were sort of doing it as a side project. And then I think once you've done it once, you know where projects are in the well, then you can sort of, you know, it's tweaking. And the way we do it is we ask companies what they're working on, and if we're factually correct. So we actually get a really strong response from companies, especially because so many of these companies are in fundraising mode. So they do actually, you know, we do actually get a good, you know, amount of response from them. So yeah, that's on the report.
All right, and then the offshore component, you think it would be easier because there's globally less, or
there's just?
And I want to be careful about offshore because there's whatever thousands of farms in Norway, right? Farm sites in Norway and things like that. So in the U.S., you know, we have a handful that are in permitting, except for the one that's in Hawaii.
But in Norway, I'm not sure if there's, you know, how many would actually qualify as offshore. You know, if you look at the movement towards semi-contained and closed containment technology, that's really taking off right now. There's been a shift in how Norwegians think about this technology in the last 2 years. There's a real convergence about this technology working. And if you look at one of the biggest salmon farming companies on the planet, Leroy Seafood, it has come out and said that by this year, 20% of all of its net pens will be submerged or with semi-closed containment technology. And this is like I think they've been working on it for some time, but they announced it and said, by next year, we'll be at that stage. I've counted 30 projects that are using closed containment or semi-closed in Norway. So yeah, I am working on this stuff a little bit.
And then the other big kind of information that you shared is the shift from fingerling to production in coastal waters with salmon to using RAS. Did I understand that correctly as well in your last?
Yeah.
Your thoughts? There's a major move.
If you took all of the post-smolt facilities that were commissioned in Norway last year, it amounts to, I think, 36,000 tons of biomass capacity, and that's actually more than all installed salmon grow-out RAS capacity in the world that's been built to date. So there's huge amounts. I mean, in Norway they call it the hybridization of the salmon industry, and with the growing climate challenges that you have with salmon, and you see the systems, countries where they haven't built these systems, they're having terrible difficulties. If you look at Scotland, where the fish are in the water for 2 summers, because effectively the smolts are going into the sea at 100 grams, they're really struggling with climate difficulties, and it's painful to watch. The industry is in the newspapers every single weekend, mainstream media, for problems. So yeah, they can't build these things fast enough.
Okay, that's enough questions from me. Sorry, I gave a great keynote, and I just wanted to capture some of that for this audience as well. As we think about this integration of land-based, potentially ponds producing fingerlings here in the United States as well, also RAS, and also what nearshore or offshore might look like.
Just one thing I'd add. If you look at this deal the other day, which involved Equilibrium Capital financing the RAS hatchery, it had a financing mechanism that was quite unusual. It basically, the financing was given on an offtake agreement. If you get financial players that are willing to do those types of deals, that could really be that could really help this sector take off. As I see it in the US, there's a real difficulty in getting these projects financed.
Thank you. We'll do maybe 1 or 2 questions from the audience if there is one, and then we'll hop back to the panel.
Thank you. This is a very interesting point. So Norway was mentioned many times, and they're very advanced in aquaculture and all that. So I know there is a lot of private investment in the aquaculture industry there. So why is not the case in the US, as much at least? Because that will help grow the aquaculture industry here, right? If private investors put money.
Sure. If you look at the Norwegian economy, you have 3 main economic activities on oil and gas, shipping, and seafood. And the sector that's made the most money in the last 10 years is seafood. And it employs large swaths of people in coastal communities, and people make a lot of money from it. That's why there's such a strong backing. And the big story with salmon is that there's not enough salmon to supply market demand. So Norway has is obviously a very wealthy economy. There's lots of investors that want to build salmon supply, and that's pretty much why.
That's fantastic. All right, so let's go to Megan, if you don't mind. And if you don't, tell us a little bit about what you're working on and some of the potential challenges as a startup and how things are going.
Yeah. So, well, I think it was pretty clear earlier, everybody thinks that Red Drum is all figured out and we need no help or assistance or guidance from anyone, nor any funding either. So all of that is 100% true. We're absolutely fine. I think we have different types of challenges now, right? We're in a different stage with this species as opposed to some of the others, where the questions that we're answering now are the questions of scale. And how do you do that in a way with the data that we have about the species and how they perform in the systems that they've been conventionally grown in? So, and it's also coming down to the fact that land-based RAS, as part of finding financing and doing creative investment in the space, is finding ways that you can capitalize on the smart design of your system and bringing upfront CapEx costs down so that your unit production metrics make sense. And that's where we're struggling right now, is I think we saw for RAS in the past, I don't know, 10 years, pitched and marketed as a tech sector. And the investors that you saw participating in the sector were new and you know, kind of first roles in blue economy, which is exciting, and they've stayed in it. But now we have to come a little bit back down to earth and say we can't have these giant startup costs that make the return on investment, you know, decades away. And I think that's something that we're realizing here in the US, is that we have to implement some of the build strategies, some of the equipment and construction material strategies that are implemented elsewhere on a larger scale already, so that we can catch up with that piece of it.
Wow. Any questions from the audience on that?
I would just echo that 100%.
So we're in the voting mode now, so
Yeah.
second,
No,
third.
we're currently, you know, work with clients again and trying to steer them. It doesn't matter where in the globe, right? But steer them to the U.S. But as hard as sometimes you try, they knock on certain doors, and then all of a sudden they're back again to where the CapEx of doing something is more reasonable.
All right, I'm going to ask her colleague from the state of Florida to share. You shared a little bit before about how you're blending live bait with food fish, but tell us about some of your other challenges of operating and perhaps where you think research should contribute, because you yourself are a very accomplished researcher in industry.
Oh, thank you. So we've been around for 10 years. I worked overseas for many, many years in Australia, and I saw what aquaculture could be. It's very developed there. I came back here and realized that academia wasn't for me, but also economically on paper I couldn't figure out a food fish to work. So I used all my own money and I dumped it into marine bait fish, which has worked. I mean, it's worked great. 90% of our production is marine bait fish. But as we've all said, most of the cost is the hatchery. The hatchery is very expensive. My labor force is expensive. We pay them more than normal labor force. So we're always looking at ways to keep that hatchery full all the time. And honestly, there's more money to be made in food fish than there is bait fish, because there's more, you know, market demand, cost, whatever. So we do grow food fish. And the problem I have is probably once a week I get contacted by somebody who wants to start up a farm. Most of them are tire kickers. Most of them have no idea about the permit process or anything about it. Or they read some paper that was developed economically in someone's office who has no awareness of actual aquaculture costs or market. And they're like, oh, I'm going to build a farm for $100,000 and we're going to be a millionaire. And you're like, well. And then probably once a month I get contacted from a serious farmer, and they still require a lot of hand-holding. And I'll say, yes, I could produce these fish for you. We have a hatchery. We have, you know, I just expanded to an even bigger facility. We have a lot of space to grow it, but the problem is you need permits, you need a site, and you need all this kind of stuff. And they think it's going to take 6 months. And when I say it's going to take years, they get really distinct. Like, I don't want to discourage them, but there has to be reality. Like this, it's going to take years. And hopefully I'll still be there. I mean, I've been there for 10 years, but like this hurry up and wait, I know for the last like 8 years, I've had countless food fish farms be like, can you produce 100,000 fish a month, every month? I said, yeah, sure. Has any of them ordered? No. Our biggest orders every time are marine bait fish right now, which luckily that's what's keeping my doors open.
Thank you.
I think it's super interesting to hear Nicole say those things, and it's maybe something that is worth considering as I hear the other people that have been up here. I mean, George, Ben, I mean, these are folks that have been in the industry for a very long time and spent their life's work in larval rearing development. And maybe that's something that we're not realizing because we're so focused on getting the grow out going and domestic production for seafood market that we're maybe ignoring all the investment and development we've put into hatcheries at this point and all that we know about it and all the expertise we have right here. And there's interest from grow out overseas where they want to do that piece. They have the infrastructure to already support that. So maybe we should focus some of our industry development on taking all the know-how that we've paid for and spent time on and exporting fingerlings elsewhere for at least a little bit of time in order to bridge the gap before we start to get some of the grow out infrastructure on the ground. I mean, we have all the resources and we have the right species. We are home to some of the highest value brood stock in terms of natural fisheries out there of anywhere in the world. So why are we ignoring that as a potential avenue to have commercial production in one fashion or another?
How is the permitting to export the fish? Like, would that be a hurdle to?
For most places, not. And because other countries have been doing that type of exchange with us for decades now, it's really not a difficult thing. Find your good fish health vets. Somebody made a comment on access to vets. Make sure you got one of those, and you're good to go.
Yeah, we've been asked to export fish. We don't really, I think the problem that I have is fingerlings are very expensive, but it's an economy of scale. So like I get one farm, like one redfish farm or one pompano farm or one whatever ask me for fish. If they're, I give them the tier pricing. If you're ordering like less than 10,000 fish, it's going to be really expensive. If you're ordering over, 30,000 fish, it's cheaper and then there's tiers. And it also works if there's 7 different farms ordering. Because then you could dedicate an entire wing of your place to always predictably produce one species, and they're always going to be cheaper. The problem is you get this, it still happens. I'll get like an academic usually call me and say, can I order 30 pompano for like tomorrow for an experiment? We don't have 30 pompano just hanging out in a tank, right? And I'm not going to produce 30 pompano. That's like absurd. But the same thing happens like the aquaponics people. Like aquaponics red drum is a big thing. It is. I don't know where the red drum go, honestly. I don't know if they actually end up in the market or if they sell them to their friends and family and they grow the other things. But I have like 10 of them and I make them order together. Because growing 10,000 fish is better than 1,000 fish each.
Thank you, Nicole. If you pass the microphone to Nick King, or tell us a little bit about your experience. And I'll say, Nicole, I like it when people order fingerlings and then pick them up like 2 or 3 weeks late.
Yeah, that's awesome.
That's
Isn't that
awesome?
While I do have a pretty broad background, I mean, I've started working with George in what would have been the first marine fish hatchery back in the mid-1990s, and moved along from there to working in feed and then in fish health. But now I've really seen a different side of aquaculture that I hadn't experienced in the last 25 years, and that is the permitting. And boy, it's interesting. I thought as a biologist on a team of people permitting a farm, you maybe really didn't have that much value until we got to operations. I'm a fish operations type of person. But there's a lot of education that needs to be happening during the permitting process, because you are often in front of board members, you are in front of commissioners that are really not well educated about your project. I mean, it's impossible for them to review a 2,000-page environmental impact report, in preparation for a hearing that you may have with a week's notice. So, it's been really eye-opening for us. I mean, if I were to give some advice about our experience in permitting, let's see. we work in California, and we were warned, be careful, California will be one of the most difficult states to achieve an aquaculture permit, even for a land-based farm like we're doing. But in reality, it's actually been not so bad from that perspective. The agencies are very facilitative. They get it. In fact, we were in front of the California Coastal Commission, which is sort of this top agency that has very broad reach. And while you may get all the permissions from the county level, and even at the state level, it's really the Coastal Commission that protects the coast under the Coastal Act. And those commissioners, they got it. They said, look, whether we like it or not, we're consuming a lot of seafood in this state, in this country. And a lot of that seafood is being imported from outside, where we have no control over the impacts of seafood production elsewhere. And this from a commissioner saying, look, we have the opportunity to bring this under the most strict regulatory authority in the state of California to make sure it's done right. We're going to be accountable, and we're going to be responsible for our seafood production. So it really tells you that they get it. I mean, we've been in front of the Coastal Commission, 20 commissioners twice. We got one more to go in May. And we've gotten unanimous votes in support. In fact, the last hearing we had, which was in December, the chair of the Coastal Commission said, looked left, looked right, said, can we just jump to a unanimous vote? So that really said a lot for aquaculture development for that state. Look at what your long lead time items are. I mean, some items we've been 2 years just to get to a hearing because we have to work with staffers, we have to work with our consultants and our legal team to actually compile the application to be able to submit it. And not waste your time while you're waiting for 2 years for staff to respond. You have a lot of stakeholders, a lot of people in the community, and you need to stay in front of them and inform them of what your plans are. Hide nothing really, be transparent. And they can be your greatest assets. In fact, we, at the last hearing we had, went into the hearing with a letter of endorsement from Surfrider Foundation, from the Baykeeper, the Baywatch for Humboldt Bay, and two other environmental non-government organizations that previously had said we're not opposed, but we're not supporting. This time they came out and said we are supporting this project due to some of the standards we've taken in negotiating with them over years. And the interdependencies between agencies. I say we work with 9 agencies. They all sort of have interdependencies upon each other. You can't sort of go with one until the other one's finished. And so understanding, the map, the road map, who relies upon who, facilitating discussion between these agency staffers is critical. We have streamlining laws, but often agencies don't have the resources to keep up with streamlining laws. And I would say one other point is uncertainty around timelines. While you may have 30 days once your application is filed to be reviewed, and then it goes to a public comment for 30 days, and then you may have your hearing definitively scheduled. But then the appeals come. And once an appeal comes, it's, you have no idea how long it's going to take. And that's the kind of uncertainty that ownership investors don't particularly like. If it's going to be 3 years, you tell them it's 3 years, and they're fine with that. But as soon as you say, yeah, but a lawsuit could come along or an appeal could come along, that creates some concern. And I'm quite frankly surprised our owners have stuck with us as long as they have for that project in California. But we're actually very close. We have just one final hearing in front of us, and then we're good to go. Yeah.
That's fantastic. Well, we're kind of at time. I want to thank everybody for coming in. Thank you all so much. I know that the questions continue, and so I want to encourage you all to connect with the panelists here and the previous panelists. Thank you so much. It got a little warm in here just a few minutes ago, so I really appreciate everybody sticking it out. And then again, please share with your colleagues and the others in the industry that were not here the survey. It would be really important to have that feedback as we think through the future for marine aquaculture. So thank you, everybody.